Hello, happy Tuesday. Welcome to another episode of The Healing Home. I'm your host, Michelle, and today we have a special episode, something that's very near and dear to my heart, and it is Kitchen Witchery and Saturnian Medicine. Now, we are in the season of Saturn. This is my birthday month as well. So I've always felt a super strong connection to Saturn and Capricorn and all the energies that come along with it. And as I've, furthered my studies with herbs and plants, I really have always found that I'm drawn to a lot of the Saturnian plants for many reasons. Now, this was going to be a solo show, but as Mario and I were putting together my slideshow, Mario had so many great insights as usual as we were putting the slides together. And so together we kind of just decided, hey, you should come on to this episode because he's going to be able to add a lot of really great insights. And both of us really love this topic. And I find that we're just both really drawn to it. And we usually have a lot to say about it. So, with that said, I'm going to bring in Mario so we can get going. Hey, babe.
Nice to
How's
see
it
you.
going? You
Good,
too?
good. Yeah, we were just hanging out a few minutes ago, and it's funny just how time flies, but here we are, ready to talk about kitchen witchery and Saturnian medicine. And yeah, when you were basically telling me what you had in mind for the show, it got my mind going, and there was a lot of connections that I saw with some of the slides. So we figured I would just pop in and kind of give my 2 cents as you run through everything here.
Yeah, definitely. And, I'm very grateful you're here. And as usual, you always bring something so awesome to the conversation and you always put my heart at ease. And so it's going to be great.
Same.
And thank you. And, for anyone who tuned into our show that we did together, you may remember we had a lot of technical difficulties, us trying to be on separate screens, but we've kind of done a little bit of, back end work to hopefully make sure that there are no technical difficulties. So we're just going to go with how we're going. And if there are technical difficulties, we'll take them as they come, like we did last time. But it's easier for us to be on separate screens just because it's kind of weird if you have to share a mic and all that stuff, right? So until we get a proper setup where maybe two people can be in the same space, this is how we'll roll.
Exactly. Right. I think we'll be good. So we're on two separate connections, and that was the main issue last time, is just the slow internet connection we have out here. So but everyone had great things to say otherwise. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, totally. So do you have anything you want that's like been on your mind before we get into the actual slideshow? Um, just anything that you have that you wanted to start out with before we get into slides, or should we just go right into it?
I think most of the things I wanted to say will come up during the slides, but it is always interesting just to acknowledge the changing seasons and the signs. We're outside more in this new location. We've been here for, it's going to be 2 years, but it's flown by. But I just feel like we have a deeper awareness of the seasonal cycles and just the changes in nature and everything else. And so it's always interesting just to see what's happening outside and how each sign corresponds with that. And so we are definitely in Capricorn season for sure. And Saturn, you could just feel Saturn's presence. And I know that Saturn has been something that we've both kind of just bonded over for many years. You being a Capricorn, we acknowledge Saturn through that correspondence. But I feel like we both have Saturnian personalities too. So I know when it comes to Saturn symbolism, some people are kind of spooked, or they think that it's, dark in a negative way. And I know we don't really see it like that. So I think this is kind of a perfect episode for us to come together on and just talk about our love of Saturn and just all of the different things it represents.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And yeah, I've always, and we've talked about this obviously, but I've always looked at our relationship to Saturn has helped us to like go into some of the darker spaces. And we both have an interest in things that sometimes are a little bit more taboo or someone might call a cult or whatever. So I feel like our relationship to Saturn has actually helped us on multiple levels, even throughout our relationship as well. So yeah, I think
Exactly. Yeah.
that's yeah. And yeah, you
Saturn
can.
is a great teacher. I feel like all lessons, especially the difficult ones, kind of go back to Saturnian principles and stuff. So I'm sure if we just cruise through the slides and then you say your piece and everything else, all of the different things that I want to talk about will come out.
All right, cool. Well, with that said, then let's just get into the slideshow. So pull that up for us.
Cool.
All right. So, first off, we have the kitchen. This is the hearth, right? So, the whole reason, one of the main reasons I wanted to talk about this is, you hear the term kitchen witch, kitchen witchery kind of tossed around a lot. And, when I first kind of started, realizing that I fall into this category, one of the things that I remember thinking was like, well, what does that even mean? Like a kitchen witch? I think it's a broad term. I think a lot of people might have an opinion on what it means. It might mean something different to everyone. But, in my opinion, the hearth and the kitchen is usually the center of the home, right? And so everything that's done in the kitchen, in my opinion, radiates out throughout the entire home. So with kitchen witchery, my thoughts on it is that it's a woman or a man who is cooking with intention, who is working with the seasons, who has really just a good grounded sense about them when it comes to the food that they prepare and why they prepare it, why they put it in their body, and what these foods are representing to them. Possibly it's somebody that likes to put blessings into their food. They have a ritual maybe that they do with every meal or while they're preparing a meal, or they love making food for people, just because of the pure joy of it. And so to me, when I see this photo, when I see the hearth and I see just like there's a bowl of vegetables and there's the bowl with the spoon, and you can tell it's kind of like it has the sense of it being a working kitchen. And I feel like that really to me kind of encompasses what kitchen witchery is. It's being in that sacred center of the home. And I find that the hearth and the kitchen are kind of where that happens, right? And in my opinion, as I was thinking about this presentation, in my opinion, kitchen witchery is kind of like the original practical magic, because it's like an original form of practical magic when I think about it, because you know everyone has to eat. It's debatable on how much we have to eat or how many times a day we have to eat, but in terms of sustenance and like survival and our ancestors and what our ancestors did and the traditions that they had with food and everything else, I think that it all kind of goes along with kitchen witchery. And a lot of that has to do too with like bringing things in from outside, right? Like outside the home, seasonally, bringing that into the house to bring nature in and be able to work with those seasons.
Right. And to me, what it reminds me of too is just the idea that the home means something else during the winter than it does during the summer. And it all depends on where you live, but the home and having a roof over your head and having, all of your things in one location, it helps you survive the elements, obviously. And so it means something else when the weather is harsh outside. So it is your lifeline, essentially, right? And so that's something that I've been thinking about as well. And also, I did a video about this maybe a year or so ago, but I explored the different symbols that relate to each season. And there's four symbols for each one for each season. And the symbol for winter, it looks like a little home. It has like two lines, and then there's a line over it, and then it looks like there's some dots within that little structure. And some people have said that it looks like a storehouse, right? Almost like where you would have your food or your grains or something like that. And there's a lot of grain symbolism that corresponds with Capricorn as well, which we could probably get into at some point. But even the grains and grain harvest, and the idea of harvest and being able to store food so that you can survive the winter, like that's part of the symbolism of what we're talking about here. And so the home, um, it in and of itself is very Saturnian, because Saturn corresponds with limitations and boundaries and restrictions. Therefore, the roof and the walls of your home are very Saturnian. It keeps things out, and it keeps things in. And so that is what you're dealing with Saturn. It's almost like the symbolism of containers and walls and partitions and things like that. So Saturn is absolutely, its presence is everywhere. And I think one of the things we'll be talking about too is this idea of, today, most people, when they think of Saturn, they think of a masculine entity, an old man. Oftentimes he has a white beard. He kind of looks like a god like figure, father time, etc. But it seems to me like before that was the case, Saturn was likely represented as a woman, as like a crone, as an older woman. So I think the witch symbolism just kind of naturally corresponds with Saturn in and of itself. But I just wanted to mention that regarding the home. It's an issue having to do with survival, but there's also this deeply spiritual sort of thing. And as you're saying, truly the kitchen is the heart of the home, and this is how it used to be back in the day, with really simple huts and simple structures. The fire was generally in the center of that hut, and then people were surrounded around that fire. And so this was the sacred center in the home. And in a lot of ways, this kind of mirrored what was happening in the heavens, depending on your cosmology, the North Star with all the stars revolving around it. And so, basically, all of your points are well taken. And the fact that you're so good at kitchen witchery, I just feel the warmth. And to me, just our lifestyle and everything else, it does feel like truly part of the home. And it reverberates everywhere else. I feel the love. So, anyways, I just wanted to throw those things out there.
Yeah, thank you. And all great points. And you inspire me to be a better kitchen witch or homemaker or whatever you want to say, because I was fortunate enough to have a mother and a grandmother and aunts and uncles and and a father who really loved to cook. And I feel like that was instilled in me at a really young age, the importance of preparing food with intention and with love and to share it. And some of my greatest memories have to do with food. And that also could be why one of the reasons why food has been one of my bigger areas of shadow work that I've had to deal with. That's possibly, but there's so much joy that I have. There's so many joyous memories I have from, just my grandma making her favorite dish, or she would always ask every grandkid what cake they wanted for their birthday, until we were a certain age. It was always a very special event. And if I ever had friends and we were having a party or something, they were always invited. And it just was a very warm feeling. And I get the same sense from your family as well. And I think that in many to all cultures, food, it plays a huge role. And it's a way to bring people together. And I think that that's one of the main things too. When I think about all this stuff and the sacred center specifically, you're asking people to come into the center of your home. I mean, that's a really important invite, and when you allow someone into your space, that's something that should be honored, I feel like, and yeah, those are just some of the things that I'm, thinking right off the top of my head with this.
Right. And obviously, depending on where you live, you're going to congregate in the home, because of what's going on out there weather-wise. So there were more traditions and parties and celebrations and stuff that happened indoors simply because of the elements, So having a nice cozy place that's warm with food, that was very crucial stuff. Most people today, at least in the Western world, you live in a suburban type area, or you live in a building or something like that. But way back when, if you're traveling, having just a home to go to stop at, an inn. Or a lot of times it was actually bars. That was a rabbit hole that I went down. I don't know if you remember that, but the importance of bars over time, in that they basically were resting places for people, for travelers, so you can get a drink, you can get food, and you can actually just stay warm. And so yeah, these things are really important, and I'm digging the fact that we're being able just to get into it here, because some of this stuff is just kind of lost now in today's world. But yeah, this is great stuff so far. But
Yeah,
yes, excellent point.
yeah, I agree. And actually, there's a question here. I like this. Any reason a roundhouse wouldn't be better? And
Ooh,
oh, go ahead, babe.
I was just going to say shout out to Nomad. Yeah, so we're going to be doing a show later this month, but yeah, I think a roundhouse would be better, for sure, for a lot of different reasons. And I actually have a quote that I was prepared to read from this book today, At the Center of the World, which I've kind of been geeking out on. I finished it a little while ago, but there's so much important information in here, and he really gets into the whole idea of why you would want to have a round structure, and how in today's world, where you have rectangular square like structures, our hearth, the fire, is no longer at the center of the home. It's to the side, it's against a wall, it's something like that. And this guy, John Michel, he makes the argument that because we live in these types of rectangular structures and the hearth is wherever it is, that everything has been kind of thrown off psychologically. That when people used to live in primitive structures, the igloo is another example of this, that having that central fire, and then even having a central hole at the top of the structure, for the heat and smoke to escape from, that this was, very significant stuff symbolically. And so I've never lived in a round structure, but I know, babe, you've always wanted to get a yurt. So maybe at some point we'll be doing that, within a yurt. So yeah, I think that round structures are awesome, and there's also a lot of metaphysical things that people have said about that, regarding spirits and energies getting stuck in corners and things like that. And in a round structure, my understanding is things basically on a number of levels just flow better.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I love that. Yeah, I can't wait for that the section of the book when you're going to read that, because it's such a great concept. And I like that that was brought up in the chat, because yes, we will have a yurt someday. And I have always wanted to live in one. And my grandfather, he actually built a roundhouse. Well, it was actually an octagon house, and he lived in it. He built it and he lived in it for many years. He lived in it until the day he died. And I always just remember, we didn't see grandpa very often because he lived like in the north woods of Wisconsin. But when we went there, it was always such a different experience for me, because I remember when we first went and realizing he lives in a round house. Like, that is not normal. I had never seen that before, but I do think that there's something to it. And yeah, I know in like Siberia, that's a big thing. And I think Kyle from Tippy Canoe Herbs had brought that up in our one of our last shows, talking about how like the center was used, and it's kind of like for a toroidal donut sort of effect too, and that's where like the fire would come out. So yes, I
Yeah.
think there is something to it. There's something to the reason why we live in square houses now, and it's more common. Like what Shannon said in the chat, could have to do with building supplies and all those things. But I think it would probably take a little bit more thought if we were creating round or octagonal homes.
I think that one of the big parts of it has to do with industrialization and the industrialized world and things like that. And so, yeah, Kyle also brought up a really great point regarding those homes where the top of the home, because there was this hole, that when the snow was really deep, that they could enter and exit through the upper portion of the home. And he was speculating that maybe that's where Santa basically comes through the chimney. That's why he actually comes through that within the home, that it's this old sort of reference to these more primitive structures and everything else. So lots of great comments too in the chat, as always, about all this stuff, and questions.
Yeah, I agree. And yeah, that's a good point. I forgot about the snow thing, but that makes total sense.
Yeah.
And so here's just a photo of my blackberry harvest from this past summer, right? And so I wanted to put this into the slideshow because to me, this kind of just seeing all these items made from one ingredient, it epitomizes kitchen witchery to me. Because I believe, like I said in the beginning of the presentation, kitchen witchery has a lot to do with working what is local to you, what is in season, and using it to its maximum capacity. So, fortunately, we live fairly close to a friend of ours who owns a decent amount of land, and he has just tons of blackberry bushes. And I was able to go over there with a friend of mine, and we harvested so many blackberries, and more than I ever could have imagined. And I remember our friend Mark saying, we didn't even make a dent in these bushes, and it's true. But when I came home, I started just creating everything blackberry, So I made scones, and I made must for a mead, I made kombucha, I made a cordial, and I made vinegar, and I just went for it, right? And so to me, this is kind of what kitchen witchery is. And that's one of the reasons why I really love herbal medicine and working with plants too, and really getting to know the plants and the foods in your area. Because if for some reason you weren't able to make it to a store, or something goes down or whatever, you really want to know where you can go to get things that can bring nutrition and sustenance to you. And I think that's one of the things about a kitchen witch is what they do, and they know the spots that they can go. And just like anything, nature changes, so some things pop up randomly and this and that or whatever. But typically when you're dealing with like things like berries or bramble, or a dense food source, there's going to be a lot of it in one or two spots, and you can like record that in your mind where it is. So I just wanted to show that
Yeah, it
as an
speaks to
example.
the practical side of you for sure. And she is way more practical than me.
Mm.
Absolutely, in the best of ways. And we have a really nice balance that way. Obviously, we think so. But, Saturn and Capricorn, the earth signs, the earth element, it's the slowest element of the four elements. And so it grasps things more slowly. It's slower to move, obviously, and adapt and change and things like that. But with this slowness, you have a foundation. There's usually this stability that kind of comes with it. And so I always think when I think of you, I think of just a very practical person, and I think there's a lot to be said about that, and just kind of like what's going on in your chart and everything else. So that's one of the things I think of as well. Kitchen witchery, it's like using, just like what you said, using things to their maximum benefit or capacity, not wasting anything, and just being very strategic and practical for sure. But yeah, this was a beautiful bounty. So even just looking at this photo makes me very happy. And everything was delicious, obviously.
Yeah, right on. And it makes me happy too, because it was a good memory. And I remember the feeling of accomplishment too after doing this. And I get that with a lot of things that I do, especially when I'm working with foods and herbs. It's like you can kind of blow your own mind sometimes at the amount of things you can create with just like one food or fruit. It's pretty incredible.
Right, right. And just saying, they're called blackberries, and black corresponds with Saturn very much.
Yeah. And
So
you
that is
always
the Saturnian color.
and you have a fond memory of blackberries from the summer too.
Yeah, they're kind of all around us, and I just remember it was so strong during the summer, the fragrance or the smell of blackberry. It was just very, very potent. It kind of blew me away. We would just walk outside, and then out of nowhere, you just get a whiff of blackberry. But it was very sweet, and you could tell that they were almost kind of like baking under the sun a little bit. And so you could almost, that was just in the air, a few times for me. And we have a lot of wind up here too, so sometimes things will just kind of come in waves. or whatever. But yeah, to me, it's just always a reminder, foraging and things like that. It's just a reminder of the abundance of nature, and of the universe. So there's so many things we can use that are helpful, that are nutritious or medicinal, and they're all around us. There's probably stuff in your backyard right now that could assist you with some ailment or something like that. And so foraging to me is just one of the most beautiful things we've kind of developed as a habit as a couple.
Yeah, definitely. And you're really great at foraging. So it's really cool. And I think that some people just have more of a knack for it too. Or I think there's like you have to have a fearlessness about you when walking, going through the forest or whatever. If you're not used to it, it might take some time to get used to it, but to see you just like go for it and go out and then you'll come back with all this bounty. It's just always so beautiful to see. So
Yeah, absolutely. And just to add to this comment real quick, black is also the color of inertia slash potential. And it's arguable that black is also the color of time itself and
mm,
fertility as well. So I just thought I would throw that out there.
yeah, that's a good one because yeah, the black of the womb. I think of that for
Yeah,
sure.
absolutely.
All right. All right. So this is one of my favorite weaves of this presentation. And it's one of the first things I thought about when I started formulating the notes and the structure for it because I love this. I love this tarot card. And babe, what deck is this from again?
Oh, I believe this is the Neoclassico, if I'm not mistaken.
I think that kind of sounds familiar. But this card, this is the devil card. And so this is the card of Capricorn. Um, and what I love about this so much is that the devil is hovering his hand over the home. And to me, it just always shows me that like the devil, it's like the domestic arts and all of that stuff, the practicality of the home, the protection the home provides, the foundation that the home provides, it's all connected with Saturn. And it's almost like the devil's realm. So he's kind of like showing like, hey, he's like hovering over, kind of like showing his dominance or just showing that this is his realm. This is what he works with. And almost too, in his own way, he's protecting it. And he's very comfortable in his stance here in this realm. And so, kind of going back to what you had said earlier, babe, was how Saturn may have been originally a crone, a woman, and so I think that he's here to just like bring this energy. I kind of lost my train of thought what I was going for with that, but there's just like the man and woman as a unit inside the home make magic. And I think even if anyone can make magic in the home, but when you're talking about traditional roles and all of that kind of stuff, it's the place of coupling and of family and of nourishment and protection. And so I think that this card illustrates that really, really well.
Yeah, I think so too. And when I first came across this card, it is Neoclassico, the Neoclassico deck, by the way. And shout out to
Cool.
Elsie
Thank you.
King. I'm glad you're here, man. This
Me
card
too.
was
Thank you,
really
Lucas.
interesting to me when I first came across it, when I first bought this deck. And I think it says a lot of different things. One of the things, however, as you were mentioning all this stuff, is that people forget that the devil is related to laughter or mirth and merriment, as is Pan. A lot of times it has to do with kind of carnal pleasures, physical pleasures, things like that. But there is this merriment that kind of corresponds with the devil for sure. And so, in my opinion, this, but all of the gods and goddesses are within us. All of the demons and all of the angels are within us. So I don't look at the devil as being this external force, although there is something to be said about that, and I know we both have this thing with the correspondence of nature and just the wilderness, and there being this devilish sort of thing kind of going on with that. And actually there's some decks that instead of actually showing a literal devil, they're showing the woods, which I think is really fascinating, and which I think makes a lot of sense too, because you're talking about earth and what the earth produces, and things of that sort, right? But the devil has a lot to do with merriment and also fertility and sex and everything else. So look at that big spear. It's a trident, actually, but look at that big trident that he's holding. A lot of times there's this phallic sort of connotation that corresponds with the devil, for obvious reasons. The devil always has horns. Just think of the word horny. There's so many different things kind of going on here that I think relate to the domestic world or the domestic realm. Also, I'll say that a lot of devil cards, especially the really traditional ones like the Rider-Waite one, it usually shows a couple. There's usually two people that are underneath the devil's reign or underneath the devil's thumb, and a lot of times they have chains around their neck. And in the Rider-Waite version, they have a chain or a rope around their neck, and they're both tied to the devil's pedestal, which looks like a black monolith. And oftentimes, this chain or rope is actually loose enough for them to get out of as well. That's kind of one of the hidden, not so hidden subliminal things with it, is that if you're trapped somewhere, it's on you. There's some, you put yourself in that situation so you can get yourself out of it as well. So there is a very strong coupling thing that comes along with the devil, which is why many, many, many times there have been couples represented within the devil card as well. And I'll say too, and we both know this, but being coupled with somebody, being in a long-term relationship with somebody, surviving the winter with somebody, it tests you. It says a lot about you, and you're going to expose each other's triggers and traumas and hangups and things like that. So I think that there's a lot of things to kind of be said about that as well. Being in a relationship, a long-term relationship, it's not the easiest thing in the world, but it's very, very rewarding. And it's not easy because of the things that it kind of exposes about you, the things it reveals about you, and you do it to each other. So I think that's kind of all baked into this card as well. What do you think?
Yeah, I think those are all great points. And I think, it's like the couple acts as a mirror. They're mirrors for each other. Just like we're mirrors for all of our friends and our family and the people that everyone we interact with, we have the potential, the opportunity to be a mirror or to be able to view a reflection. Of ourselves in another person. And typically for me, it's just kind of like you said, it's when you're triggered or it's when you see something that triggers someone else. A lot of times, at least for me, as I just continue to grow as a person, I'm able to kind of like see parts of myself in another person, or I could see how maybe at one point I something that triggered another person used to trigger me, and then you can see that and you can reflect that, and you can almost be a safety net for somebody else in that regard. And or you can also deflect it and you can also see it and then say, you know what, I'm past that section of life. I've reflected this already. I'm seeing it again, and I'm going to choose to move in the other direction, and that's fine and healthy too. But I think that it just kind of like goes along with everything you were saying, and then I just think it goes along with the chains in the other devil card, which I've always loved
Mm.
that symbolism too, of just like it you can take it off, but so many times how many times in our own lives have you been in a situation and you don't even really realize that you have the option to go? Sometimes you're so spun up in something that you don't realize that you actually have an option. And I think that that's what that devil card kind of represents too, and how they show that. Definitely.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just add this as well. The devil card, as you've already mentioned, it's ruled by Capricorn. Capricorn is the sea goat. So the front portion is a goat. The lower or back portion is the fish part of the sea goat. And so it's fascinating to me that the goat has this tendency, obviously, to climb. And so it's an amazing climber. And so it climbs, and there are few animals that can climb better than the goat itself. Arguably, the other animal that comes to mind would be the ram. And so there's an interesting relationship between goat and ram and Capricorn and Aries, which I won't get into right now, but there's a lot of stuff to be said about all of that. But the goat climbs, right? It's a climber. And it's interesting that the lower half is a fish. And so there's also this implied diving component as well, I would say, in that it can exist at the highest highs and the lowest lows, below sea level and way up above on a mountain or something like that, right? And so to me, this kind of goes back to this idea that every proposition contains its opposite. So within the lowest of lows, you're going to find the highest of highs, and within the highest of highs, you're going to find the lowest of lows. To me, this is just like a natural balance of things. And so when I think of the devil, I don't think of just low vibe, low energy. Let's just sweep it under the rug, pretend it's not there or doesn't exist or whatever. How can you reach the highest highs without developing this part of yourself, or without getting over the hangups that maybe are kind of contained in your lower chakras, or whatever you want to say, So I think of the devil as being a very necessary sort of thing, instead of it being kind of this spooky kind of deal or whatever. So within the lowest of lows, there are also the highest of highs. That's how I tend to see things symbolically.
Yeah, right on. I totally agree with that. And, we've talked about this so many times over the years, but I'm so excited to be able to have this conversation and like put this all together. So, yeah, this is brilliant so far. I'm stoked that we're finally able to just share some of the thoughts we share together
Yeah,
privately out with all the people, and it's really fun to dive into this deeper.
definitely.
So, moving on here, this is just a lovely illustration of a crone that I think, I love this illustration for many reasons, but she does to me encompass a witch, a kitchen witch, a nature witch, an herbalist, and so just another way to kind of symbolize working with the land, working with the animal spirits, working with the nature spirits. These are things that are really important, and when you are trying to connect with the land around you, it's really important to be quiet and tune in and listen, because I don't know about anybody else, but I sure get lots of messages when I'm just quiet in nature and I tune in and I allow myself to listen to what the wind has to say to me. Or, for example, the mountain. I go to the mountain when I go to the mountain a lot, but a lot of times when I go to the mountain, there's usually a message there for me, even when I didn't know there was one. So there's all these little signs, and I think that kind of also can fall under um, under the definition of a kitchen witch, or just somebody that's in tune with nature. And I think, like, deep down too, that actually just might even be what kitchen witchery is like being connected really to your home and to the space around you and the people in your home and the people you allow into your home. Um, it's just very important, and the choices we make with that, it goes a long way. And
Right.
typically these kitchen witches, man or woman, that's the other thing too. I think when I think of a kitchen witch, I typically do think of a woman, but I also know that there's plenty of men out there that love to cook and love to share and have intentions and have, rituals that they do with their foods and everything else. So, it's usually a community herbalist or like a community shaman. Like, all these energies to me kind of like fall under the ruling of Saturn as well, because these people typically are oracles in a way, or you would go to them for advice or whatever it would be. They might be able to tell you like it is, like no one else could. And so there's some sort of Saturnian energy in that as well, I find.
Oh, 100%. Absolutely. And one of the things that comes to mind is Saturn having a correspondence. I would say, arguably, there's several signs that correspond with this, including Scorpio, but there's an initiatory correspondence with Saturn and the color black as well. And it has to do with going inward, it has to do with the still point within yourself. And I'm going to be talking about this in my next video, which I'm working on, but this idea of a sacred center, whether it's a cultural, physical location, or it's the still point within, this sacred center concept, I correspond with the axis mundi, the world axis and all of that. But the idea is that you're actually connecting realms when you're doing that. You're connecting the realms above and the realms below when you do that. And that's the most important thing about it. And so symbolically, the hearth, the kitchen within the home, or any sacred space really where you might do your magic or workings, or where you can really tap in, that's what you're doing. You're bridging the gap between realms. And so to me, that's just something I wanted to say. And I think it's interesting too that she's covering her left hand. I don't know if you noticed that, but her left hand is concealed. And so there might be this implied left hand path sort of thing. But what I see actually, because I hadn't noticed that really until right now, but notice that in her right hand, she has a staff. To me, this goes back to the axis mundi, the world axis. It's very projective. When we're talking about the axis mundi, we are talking about phallus symbolism. So here in her right hand, she has something projective, something that's phallic, and then her left hand is concealed. So isn't that interesting that she's kind of doing, she's kind of uniting the polarities or whatever. So there's this projective phallic thing in her right hand, but then her left hand is passive and it's not seen, So I think that that's kind of what the kitchen witch or the crone or whatever, these types of figures, they're able to bridge that gap between projective, passive, light, dark, positive, negative, masculine, feminine, all of that stuff. That's what I tend to think. It's very mercurial that way. Being a so-called kitchen witch, or being a witch in general, that's how I intend to interpret it. Is that there's a very mercurial thing kind of going on with these arts as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. I hadn't noticed her left hand there, and then the right with the staff. And then underneath her left hand, on her left hip, she's carrying a cauldron, which we're going to talk about, later on in the presentation. But that kind of goes along with the staff and then the cauldron, being that duality, that feminine, masculine energy as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And because we're still on this slide, Still Standing asks, what's the symbolism of the black cat?
That's a good question. I mean, cat symbolism is really, we're cat people. And so you see how Michelle's all lit up right now.
And there's going to be a cat episode coming down the pipeline. You better believe it.
Yeah, definitely. Our cat's black and white. And so he's not all the way black, but that's a really good question. I mean, cats are stealthy, they're sneaky. There is this, spiritual, divine kind of quality to them. Obviously, I think, to me, whenever I think of cats, I always think about how just they're such great companions, and they actually can read energies really, really well, right? And there's this symbiotic relationship between us and cats that has existed for a very, very, very long time. But the black cat specifically, I just think of the mysterious nature of everything pretty much. So I think of things that are, veiled or occulted, magical, whimsical, things like that. And what they're actually, is a black cat different than a white cat? What kind of things do they have going on etherically or whatever? I'm not too sure. But I know we have a couple of books that could basically enlighten us about all of this too, regarding, magical cats and their symbolism and everything else. But that's a great question. I'm going to sit on that one. Do you have any thoughts about that, Bub?
Well, yeah, I do think about, just like you're talking about, the black being linked to Saturn. There is like a mysterious, there's a lot of folklore around black cats and them being quote unquote bad luck or whatever. But actually, when I taught an herbal cat care class a handful of years ago, and I had a section in the class where I talked a little bit about the history of cats. And actually, in places like Ireland and throughout Europe, specifically in England, black cats were actually good luck. And there's also folklore around the fact that witches would transform into cats and rabbits. And so Chris in the chat mentioned it's the cat and the hare. And so that a witch they could actually transform, and that's how they would do a lot of their magical workings. And so I wonder if this I wonder if this illustration is kind of trying to drive that point home of like she's walking through nature with her friends. Maybe they're other witches. Maybe they're witches, that what's the
Her
word I'm
girlfriend.
looking yeah. What's the word I'm looking for? Oh, I can't think of it. Not like when you transform into something, there's a different word. Like it's like I'm not
Morph?
yeah, yeah, like you can morph into it. And so that's something that I remember reading in a couple of the books that we have that goes more into the history of witches and cats, and that witches and cats, they're like it's like a cat, it's like a witch's best friend kind of thing, you know.
Sure. And I'm reminded as you're talking about some of this stuff is that, it's a tradition to associate black animals with the underworld as well. And
Yeah.
so there's a whole tradition of if you're going to sacrifice an animal to an underworld deity, you would sacrifice a black animal. So black cows or cats or dogs or whatever. I think it's kind of all shapeshifters. Yeah,
Yep.
totally.
Thank you, J Lo.
Um,
You got it. You read my
so yeah,
mind.
obviously there's an underworld sort of correspondence, I think, it being black. And to me, it's really interesting. Cats they've both things have been the case. They've been greatly revered and they've been part of the family and all of that, but they've also been detested and feared a great deal as well. And so there's a lot of both out there when you start looking into cat or feline symbolism. I also just have to throw out there the correspondence with Leo as well. So a lot of properties or correspondences related to Leo maybe can transfer over to the house cat as well. Oh yeah, to the right. You see that above the tail of the cat? It looks like a fox. And you are muted.
All right. I just said, great point. That's awesome. I'm working on that mute button.
Yeah.
Oh man. All right. So this slide here, this is actually from a druid plant oracle. And I came across this years ago. And the card is actually called the Restorers. And so this right here, I love this image and I feel such a kinship to it in so many ways, because this is a woman. She's in her home. She is making medicine with her mortar and pestle. She has her cauldron behind her or next to her at the fire. She has beautiful St. John's wort next to her that she probably just harvested. She's hanging herbs to dry. This to me is a medicine woman, kitchen witch, working magic in her home to help herself and help others. And yeah, I just even can't stress it enough. Is just like I feel like the kitchen witch has there's like a solitude to them, and there's a lot to be said about the whole legends and the idea of being like a solitary witch. And I know definitely like in Norse tradition, like seers and vulvas were like they were solitary. They traveled alone, they worked alone, they lived alone, typically in the forest where they were doing their magical workings and all of these things. But then there's also something to be said that, people would hire these women to come and be oracles for them, or they would go to them for advice. They would go to them for medicine. They would go to them when they were sick. And so there's a community thing going on too. So I just think that they play both roles. There's like they almost like kind of balance it out a little bit with like the ability to be by themselves and be introspective, which is very Saturnian and going inward and the wintertime and all that stuff. But then also having the bandwidth and the ability to work with other people and read their energies and kind of just get a sense for what they actually need. And so I just really love this card. And I wanted to throw it in here just to kind of hit, drive it home a little bit more of what I think that this energy really is.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And I'm glad you said that too, because I know the way we tend to think is that if you help yourself, you will in turn help others. The more you help yourself, the more you're going to help others because the more you create space, as an example, the more you heal your traumas or invisible wounds, you hold space for other people to do the same, essentially. And so if you're learning the ways of the land, if you're learning what herbs are appropriate to use for this ailment or this issue, you can pass that on to others. And so as you help yourself, you will help others. So I think that that's kind of one of the things that I have really grown to appreciate just the older I get. Just this idea that as you kind of work on self, the community at large is going to be better off because of that. And so there is this correspondence with that. So I don't look at it as being a selfish thing. I think of it as pulling your own weight. And then as you pull your own weight, um, you're going to, in turn, just basically be a benefit to other people in whatever ways that might present itself or show up. So, yes, there is this thing with being solitary and kind of isolated, but also being good with your thoughts and your story, and where you're at emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, whatever. That goes a long way. And so those people tend to be very, very solid. And so going back to the initiation thing, it just reminds me of what a lot of shamans, what their storyline is. And a lot of people, a lot of folks who are considered healers have gone and done that inner work. And a lot of times they've had this, invisible wound or trauma that they've had to overcome or integrate or deal with or whatever. And that's what allowed them to become great healers or herbalists. It's very much similar to the story of Chiron, which I've talked about before multiple times. But yeah, everything you're saying is well taken for sure. And people seem to like this illustration. I like it too.
Yeah, I think so. It's great. I mean, there's such a warmth to it too, and I love that she's kind of looking out at there's mountains there, and she has a creek by her, and it's just gorgeous. But yeah, all really great points all around.
Right, right. No, I do. I like, people are kind of mentioning in the chat, inside and outside. And then right here, Ian said, really does suggest two worlds, the previous slide, right? And so I do like that, this
Yeah,
contrast between exterior and interior. That's an excellent point. And kind of like what you were saying earlier, is like bringing things from nature and bringing them into the home. This is what happens as you lead up to winter. This is what squirrels do, and all sorts of other animals. They're saving food so that they can survive the winter. So yeah, points well
yeah,
taken all around from the chat.
totally. And Lucas bringing up the world tree hidden in there, yeah, because you can see right past her profile on her face. Um, There is a
Exactly right.
it is a trunk of a tree, and you can see that that's coming through, and so, yeah, it's a pretty loaded card. It's really gorgeous, and I'd actually love to have this as a print someday, um, to hang on the wall.
I'll see what I can do. And then also the symbolism of the mortar and pestle too. I love the Axis Mundi stuff, and so I always break it down to poles and holes. The mortar and pestle. It's another example of a pole and a hole. Something phallic, masculine, projective, Axis Mundi, world axis, world tree, and then something receptive. And so this is just another symbol that kind of bridges the gap between those two things and brings them together.
Yeah, totally. And, I like what Cody's saying here about the old stories of people, actually living in giant trees. And yeah, I think that there's something to it. And I was actually talking to Mario about this. I think this card somehow implies that she's a giant or something. So there might be something even more. Like, who knows how big this actual home is? Maybe she is living inside of the tree. But something about this tree, like in my instinct, or this tree, something about this card, I think that there's some sort of giant connotation there. Which that's a whole other rabbit hole, but I love that rabbit hole as well.
And we've mentioned this, or you've mentioned this, because of her hands. Just
Yes,
to get into the
totally.
artwork specifically, is her hands are fairly large. And that
Yes.
was the first thing I zeroed in on when she showed me this artwork. And we've had this art kind of around for different reasons for years now.
Yeah.
Uh Older presentations and things like that. And I always noticed that. And you brought up recently that maybe she's a giant. Maybe that's why she has really big hands. We can't tell if this was done intentionally or if it was unintentionally done. But either way, yeah, I mean, can you imagine living inside of a giant tree? That would be amazing.
Oh my god, it would be so cool. You know, the other giant thing, just before we move on, the St. John's wort that is next to her, it's huge. It's like it's really big. Even the blossoms are really big and everything. And so I also think that, you know, in the time of the giants, um, and when there were all these giant trees and stuff like that, I think that the plants probably mimicked that too. So maybe, you know, the plants, you know, matched the size of the giants maybe. And so anyway, there just might be something there that's trying to be implied.
Absolutely. Yeah. And people are talking about world tree symbolism in the chat and everything else. And there's so many things I want to say about that, but we can just proceed
Okay.
because otherwise I'll just get on all these different tangents.
Sounds good. Alrighty, the mighty cauldron. This is one of my favorite sections of this presentation, because not only because the cauldron can kind of be a kitchen witch's best friend, or a crone's best friend, a medicine man or woman's best friend, but the symbolism of it to me really it symbolizes a woman's womb and creation and transmutation and alchemy and death and rebirth, because you know you're putting something into the pot to be transformed into a brand new substance, usually, whether that be oatmeal that becomes from solid oats to softened broken up oats, or whatever it is. You're putting plants in and adding water, and you're adding other elements and then cooking it down. You've changed that formation. That is alchemy. So that's the epitome of alchemy. And I just love the image of cooking over an open fire, having it be so rustic, and just this is kind of like this is what our ancestors did. And I just love the image of the cauldron.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's life sustaining, you know. It's
Hmm.
these are essential things, fire and whatnot. And do you think right now would be a good time for me to read that quote?
I do. Yeah, that'd be perfect.
Yeah, I think so. So I'm going to read from this book right here, At the Center of the World by John Michel. And I just cracked it open today in preparation for this. And the first page I landed on, I have highlighted notes and everything else, but the first page I landed on had an excellent quote that I thought kind of spoke to a lot of the different things that we're talking about right now. And as you bring up Cauldron, he does mention Cauldron in here. So let me see where that's at. Okay. So again, just bear with me for a moment, but there's some great stuff in here. In the earliest and perhaps most satisfying form of dwelling, the primitive hut, the center is located in the middle of the circular room. People sit around the square hearthstone where the fire warms a round pot suspended on a chain, and smoke ascends through the apex of the conical thatched roof. Anthropologists say that this practical arrangement is everywhere seen as a cosmological scheme. Within the circumference of the universe, symbolized by the outer wall, the hearthstone is both the body of the earth, with four corners, directions, and yearly seasons, and Hestia, the hearth goddess, whose energies are concentrated in the central fire. The cauldron is on fire. The cauldron on the fire is also like the earth, a source of comfort and nourishment. And the chain which holds it is the world pole, the link between heaven and earth, and the means of intercourse with gods and spirits. The imagination ascends with the smoke, passes through the hole in the roof, and is free, like the soul of a shaman, to wander where it will. In that situation, sitting with familiar company around a fire on which a pot is simmering, one is likely to feel at ease and well centered. And so he says, we still speak of sitting around a fire, even though the modern fireplace has been displaced to one side of a rectangular room, and we actually sit in front of it. With this new fashion, the old cosmology lost its influence, and it may be that minds became less centered thereby. Yet the hearth or fireplace still provided the usual household focus, its ornamented mantel shelf serving as a personal or family altar. Today, the flickering television or the electric cooker has become the main focus of many homes. Thus, the traditional cosmology is no longer represented by its domestic symbols, and a new secular, restless, uncentered worldview has taken its place. Focus, meaning a center which receives and emits rays of light, is the Latin name for the central fireplace. The fire not only warms, but as a symbol, illuminates the corresponding images of a center to which each of our own beings and of a world centered, which is divine, eternal, and unchanging. For calming the mind and restoring it to its natural order, there is no substitute for a centrally placed hearth. There is much comfort in our modern domestic machinery, television, central heating, etc. But with these accessories, we are not exactly focused. We are, in fact, distracted, torn from the realities of dreams and imaginings, centered upon our own hearths and minds, and aimlessly adrift in a sea of alien fantasies. And then this last portion is modern house builders have given us high levels of convenience and hygiene while ignoring the psychological necessity of a proper focus. Through the absence of a cosmologically significant center, the modern mind has become unbalanced and we are less able to feel centered. And so hopefully you guys got all of that. But yeah, just kind of going back to once again the hearth being the center and the significance of that. This book gets into some of that symbolism, and I just think that when you think of a primitive structure or a primitive hut, we don't think of it as being um, kind of sophisticated. Obviously, we don't think of it as being done with any kind of real reason or intention. We just think it's simple. It's not what we have today. But that structure really did serve a purpose. And our ancestors likely lived like that for a very, very long period of time. And it's not until fairly recently have things really changed. And so the hearth or that central fire is no longer the focus. So you just have to wonder, what has been lost now that things are microwaved and now that, there isn't this central sort of space or whatever with fire. In a lot of ways, I think kind of the computer screen actually and the cell phone and screens in general have kind of replaced this hearth that people used to look into and used to get this sense of comfort from and everything else. So I just want to read that, and hopefully you guys got something out of it.
Yeah, it's a great little section of that book. I mean, even just hearing it today for the first time, I was like, "Whoa, that totally encompasses all of this." And it makes so much sense to me. To me, it makes sense on the level of moving away from the circular home and being around a fire and it being in the center and that throwing everything off balance. And I think that that's probably just like we were talking about in the beginning of the show, why don't we have round homes? Well, I think that there's like a pretty probably deep reason for it. I think building supplies and modern technology kind of comes into it, but just like so many things we learn about in life, there's so many inversions, and I think that taking that circular living vessel, that center of the home, that's a huge inversion and kind of just like puts discord into a lot of people's lives. And I do agree with you on screens and computers and all these things, TVs taking away, becoming the hearth, becoming the fire where everybody circles around and is so fixated on.
The flickering light. Yeah.
Yeah,
So the
totally.
main thing is that as your living arrangements are more holistic and as there might be a center to your community or your tribe or your village, that encourages you to find your own sacred center. And so that's kind of the difference is that if you grew up in a primitive structure that had this central hearth, psychologically it embeds I think kind of like an innate desire, even if it's just subliminally or whatever, to find your kind of true north, your center,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's kind of the main thing about it is that I think that that's kind of part of what happens when everything is kind of thrown off around you. And if you're not living in a structure that is kind of designed to flow energy and for you to find your inner point, I just think that there's a lot of things that used to be so simple that people used to do, and it was just kind of common knowledge, um, to just kind of arrange things in a certain kind of way. But I think that it also kind of performs another kind of function, I guess, within your own psychology and everything else. So we watched a video where people were building an igloo. Do you remember that? Not too long
Oh yeah.
ago.
Yep, definitely.
So they built an igloo. We saw these Eskimos literally build an igloo, from beginning to end. And this was video shot in, like, I don't even know, the 50s or 60s or something like that. And sure enough, they had that central fire, within the igloo. And it was really, really cool to see, just to kind of witness how they kind of figured things out, and how natural it was for them to build something like this, and how this was just passed down from generation to generation. And it was just a beautiful thing, just to kind of see it all come together, and to see what it's like on the interior, because it's so different from what we experience today. So anyway, so that's what I have with that.
Yeah, no, all great points. Yeah, the igloo thing is so cool, and I highly recommend, if anyone's interested in that side of culture, I recommend just looking it up. You know, seeing videos how they build the igloos, and it's really cool. And I just, it kind of goes along with what we're talking about, the sacred center and the round homes, and working with what you have, which is for them ice and snow, and making do. And it's just
Right.
impressive, and it just really goes to show how resilient human beings are. I mean, and how adaptable we really are. And the limits that we can be pushed to, and still persevere and survive. And I just think that all of these things too, all these challenges that our ancestors go through, and we go through, it, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right? So I think that this kind of magic, this kind of living, these kinds of subjects kind of all fall into that area of life too. And
For sure.
so these cauldrons right here, they don't have feet, but a lot of times if you look up the image of a cauldron, sometimes they have like 3 feet, that they rest on. And that also to me could possibly represent like the triple goddess. Because the cauldron, in my opinion, is more of a feminine symbol. Though that 3-legged design, it's kind of just another symbolic nod to that, in my opinion. Oh.
Right, exactly.
All right. And now to the broom. Oh, yes. One of my favorite things. I have a very strong fondness to brooms. I have them around me. They seem to make their way to me a lot of times. I've been gifted brooms, or the one that's right behind me on my right behind me, but it looks like it's on my left either way. It's behind me hanging.
There's 3 of them behind you.
There are 3 of them. So the one that is right here. We go to we have a group of friends that we hang out with, and we used to have these meetings that we would go to. And one day a lady came up to me and she said, "Do you want a broom? I have an extra broom. I'll bring it next week or whatever." And I said, "Oh, of course." And that's happened to me before. Or a friend of mine, "Oh, I'm at this thrift shop. There's a broom. Do you want it?" Send me pictures of it. And so whatever it is, there's some sort of magnetism with brooms and me. And so I find a lot of power in them, and they're very symbolic on a lot of levels. And my first thought, when you see the broomstick, and when I was doing this research and putting all this together, I was doing cauldrons and then brooms, and I was like, wow, you have feminine and masculine right there. Obviously the broomstick is very masculine and phallic symbolism, whereas the cauldron is the round womb. But then upon further inspection, when you really look at a broom, it's actually both female and masculine. You have the broomstick, which is the phallus, and then we have the bristles, which is more feminine for sure. And there's like a softness to it, even though broom bristles are usually not very soft. But you know what I'm saying? It's it kind of represents the feminine principle. And so all in one, we have this. And then Nomad podcast says poles and holes, and so that's what's going on with the broom, in my opinion. And it also is a symbol of fertility. And so a lot of times, in certain cultures, I think specifically European, the broom was you would do like a jumping of the broom ceremony for a wedding, right? So the couple together would jump over the broom, symbolizing their union, and then also as kind of like a blessing for fertility to have a child. And then in the research I was doing, people say that if a unwedded woman were to jump over a broom, she may have a baby before she either finds like a husband or is married. So there's all this really cool folklore surrounding the broom. And I know that you have a lot to say about this one too, babe, but yeah, the sweeping away and clearing of energies, that's the first thing, one of the first things that comes to mind when I see a broom. The magic that can be done by just simply sweeping your space. And that's something that a kitchen witch does. They care about their space. They want it to be nice. There's intention there. And I've always felt this way because it's the way I was raised by my mother, and my mother is still this way, but her space is always very tidy, and not even in like a crazy cleaning lady way, just in a very homey, pleasant, comfortable way. And I too am like that. I like to keep it organized, and there's intention in that. Like I hold that to very high esteem, and I think that the way a person carries themselves or their home, or just the way that they present themselves to the world, it really says a lot. It says a lot about either your priorities or whatever, but there's a lot of intention that can be put into that, and the tidying up of a space can be magical. I mean, cleaning's not always fun, but it sure as hell feels really good when you have a clean space. I mean, most people can attest to that. And so there's a lot of beautiful symbolism with cleaning and sweeping away of things.
Definitely. I would rather sweep than vacuum, personally.
Me too. So
But
would
in this
cats.
place, we're vacuuming more than sweeping. In our
Yeah.
old place with hardwood floors and everything, we swept more, which I just strongly prefer. But yes, I have a lot to say about this. And just to clarify, we don't have to skip to it just yet, but the witch is the next slide.
Yes, it is. Do you want me to go to
Okay.
that?
No, not yet.
Okay.
And so when Michelle was bringing up the broom, and especially the next slide, a few things kind of came to me, and one of them is that you really are seeing kind of a symbol that encapsulates both the masculine and the feminine. And I would say that the broom handle, the shaft of the broom, is phallic masculine. It reminds me very much of the world axis. And the world axis, for those of you guys who don't know, but it is the symbolic, bridge between the North Pole and the northern sky, specifically Polaris, the North Star. So there's a direct correspondence between the northern part of Earth and the northern sky. And it's been long believed that there is a bridge or gateway passageway of some sort between these two locations, right? And this is what the psychopomp, in my opinion, this is how the psychopomp gets around, is he goes up and down the world axis. He goes up and down the tree of life, or the world tree, right? And so you have this phallic masculine portion of the broom. And as you mentioned, the bristles really are feminine. And so to me, feminine symbolism, I've learned, over the last several months, that hair, like tangled hair, as an example, is very feminine. Women tend to have longer hair than men. I know a lot of these things are generalities, so excuse me if people find kind of exceptions to any of these claims, I guess. But to me, the bristles are a little more chaotic. It reminds me of just kind of like the wilderness, I guess you could say. It reminds me of tangled hair. And if anyone watched my Decoding Chaos presentation on Interverse, shout out Chance, they'll know that untangling the hair, which we'll get into later, that was the supposed job of the masculine entity, of a godlike figure, of the phallus, even, of the axis mundi. The axis mundi being the thing that separated, this domain, so that we can actually have an Earth, and so the elements can play and everything else. Before that, it was just chaos. So when chaos is just kind of commingled together, it's symbolic of being tangled, and then untangling that mess is symbolic of the axis mundi bringing order and law and structure and stability to this whole entire place, right? And so you have this axis mundi symbol, and then you have this phallic symbol, but then you also have this chaos of the bristles itself. And so definitely more feminine, in my opinion, down below versus up top. But now we can get to the next slide. And if you want to introduce kind of how you came across this information, feel free, and then I can chime in.
Yeah, totally. Great points. And what I think there's one slide in between there.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, but yep.
It doesn't matter.
It has it
Go
relates to
for
the
it.
broom though.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
this is broom corn, but I thought it kind of had like a brain fart. I forgot that we threw this one in there. This is broom corn that we grew, and it's used to make brooms. There's a lot of things throughout history that people have used to make brooms, depending on the culture and also what grows around them. But broom corn definitely it makes lovely brooms. I mean, just looking at it, this is after I strip the seeds off. So there'll be seeds that come on top, and you easily can just strip them off with your hand, and then you're left with this beautiful material that is bristly like a broom, and it's so gorgeous. And this variety kind of makes different colors, so there's like different shades of like red and tan and stuff. But yeah, it's a therapeutic practice too. I've yet to actually make my own broom, but I will do it because we have all the stuff to do it. But even just stripping the seeds from the broom corn is really therapeutic. And one thing else about the broom is that it's a symbol of protection. So just like the stability that you talked about, that the masculine brings, women also provide protection as well as mothers, but there's a feeling of protection that comes from a man who's asserting their power, who's confident, who stands their ground, who is the protector, right? They protect they protect what is precious to them, just like a mother does, as well, or a woman would. But there's a lot of folklore around people hanging brooms over the door as a symbol to keep out unwanted guests. A lot of times, having a broom hung next to a door or like behind a door has the same connotation. So there's all sorts of little really cool things going on with that. But here, the next slide, this is the one we're talking about. So this is so interesting to me because I just recently learned this, but in a lot of older illustrations of witches riding brooms, they have the bristles in front. Now, this is a huge weave like both Mario and I are interested in now, and we're going to dive deeper into it. But I was coming across all these images of like old Halloween cards, like vintage ones, and then old illustrations like this. Francisco Goya has an illustration as well of witches flying, and his broom is bristles forward as well. And so when I brought this up to Mario, this is actually the slide that made us decide that he should he should come in on this conversation, because both of us were like, "Whoa, that's like actually pretty weavy and deep." And so if you wanted to go into some of your thoughts on this, yeah, go for it.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So the main thing that I just want to point out is that by having the bristles be up front, symbolically, it's very different from having the bristles in the back of the broom, in my opinion. So, as an example, when you're looking at symbols, say the Venus symbol, it's a circle with a square down below. That's putting the circle above the square. That's saying that the feminine precedes the masculine with that symbol. And that's just my opinion. And sometimes Mars is actually shown as the reverse. It's the cross, excuse me, the circle and then the cross down below. With Mars, an esoteric way of depicting the Mars glyph is to have the cross above the circle. That's putting the masculine energy ahead of the feminine. And so to me, having the original illustrations, or I guess the belief that witches used to fly with the bristles ahead of the pole of the broom, is putting the feminine ahead of the masculine, which to me lines up symbolically with probably how it used to be. So in my opinion, those bristles there, it's almost like putting the bush in front of the penis, basically, is kind of how I look at it. And so you're putting this chaotic feminine energy. And this isn't to say people have the wrong idea of what chaos represents. It's very, very, very powerful. And it's not demeaning, it's not derogatory, it's not negative at all. The same way when I say that feminine symbolism generally is more passive, same exact thing. Passivity is necessary. Just think of the yin and yang symbol with the I Ching. Yang is a complete line, and then yin is a broken line. That's more passive than the projective masculine yang symbol. So to me, this is kind of going back to the roots of probably maybe what the original way of showing this was all about, was by putting the bristles, the feminine, ahead of the masculine. And this has been done so many times throughout history, is that a lot of symbols that we see today tend to be a little more masculine in nature, or the focus tends to be on a lot of times solar energy, when previously the energy was actually more feminine and was actually more passive. And so this is kind of the same thing that we were talking about with Saturn, potentially being a crone or a woman way back when, but nowadays we just acknowledge it as father time. Maybe it was mother time, So I just thought this was a really interesting development, that there is this switch between the bristles being in the front and the bristles being in the back. And also what I want to say is, since I tend to correlate things with being axis mundi symbols, meaning the world axis, meaning the bridge or stairway between realms at the north, symbolically at the north, I think what the witch riding the broom, what that actually represents, is not necessarily her having like a physical vehicle. This isn't like a literal thing that witches used to ride around on broomsticks. Although I know there's lore and stuff about all of that, which is really fascinating, and I want you to chime in on what potentially that means. But to me, it's symbolic of basically the axis mundi symbol, it being a gateway or a path. Sometimes it's referred to as the royal road as well. But to me, this is symbolic of the power of going within, and how when you go within, you travel between realms. And this travel between realms oftentimes is very symbolically, it looks very phallic. And so to me, that's kind of what the broom represents, is that it represents, this world tree or whatever, between different realities, different realms, whatever. And that she is accessing that gate via this broom, via going within. And then I also can't not look at her hat and think that it's a very similar symbol. It's kind of this cone that goes upward, reminds me very much of the Central Mountain, Mount Meru, or things like that, which there's a whole history of world mountains or holy mountains existing at the sacred center of Earth, or at the sacred center of a cultural location or whatever. And all of these centers, once again, represent the ability to pass between worlds, essentially. So hopefully that all made sense. But that's kind of what I'm seeing with all this stuff now.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I mean, when you brought that up, it totally, it resonated deeply. Because one of the explanations for this on where one of the blogs I read was that, well, witches are nonconformists, so they just they turn the broom around because they don't want to conform to society's norms or whatever. Which I do believe that there is part of that with a witch, or quote unquote witch or whatever, but I think that it's much deeper than that. I think that you hit it on the head with putting the feminine before the masculine. And then I love the weave with the ascension and the hat as well. I think this all just like really makes a lot of sense. And then I just have to say that Binabu or Binabi, she commented, "Look at the cat, and it's hilarious." And I thought the same thing when I saw this cat, because the cat has straight teeth; it doesn't have fangs, and so it's just really funny. It kind of looks almost like a human. So maybe going back to the thing we talked about earlier, maybe implying that it's a witch that's been that shapeshifted shapeshifted into a cat to fly with her friend or something. I don't know, but it is kind of funny. But I love this image, and this weave of them turning the broom is really fascinating to me. And I'd love to know when that happened, when that inversion maybe happened, because now obviously when you see any modern depiction of a witch, particularly in like Halloween decorations, the broom is always turned, the bristles are always behind her, always. And so I kind of want to know a little bit more about, maybe when that started happening. Um, but
Right. So I
you
just
know,
want to say
oh, go
too,
ahead.
unless
hmm
you go for it.
No, go ahead, because I just have thoughts about the symbolism of the a witch flying, but you should complete your thought.
I just wanted to say that this central axis point, the world axis, right? This is where the psychopomp, the guides of souls, this is how they take people to the afterlife as well. And so all travel symbolism goes back to the journey of the afterlife, in my opinion. So whether you're talking about the horse, or you're talking about the chariot, or you're talking about the boat, or the locomotive, or you're talking about the broom, the ultimate journey, or the ultimate trip, is the journey of the afterlife, of passing to the other side, sort of thing. So I tend to encapsulate all of the symbols related to vehicles and things like that. That's what I think it ultimately represents as well, on another level. But what were you going to say?
No, totally. That's a good thought. Well, going to the whole thing of this being a metaphor of the witches flying, it kind of even rolls into the next section of the presentation, because I do think that it's a metaphor for the witches working with the nightshade plants. And so, anyone who's familiar with the nightshades, they are all ruled by Saturn, and they typically have psychoactive properties to them, but they're poison plants. So they have to be used in very small doses, because large doses can be lethal. And one of the stories of the witches is that they used flying ointments that the devil would either gift to them, or that the witch herself made, and they would apply it to the broomstick, and then they would be absorbing the ointment through their vaginal cavities, right? So the whole thing, and they also, the other thing about this is that they would apply the ointments to their underarms, in the hairy areas of their body.
Oh,
So that was a very interesting little tidbit that I learned too. And so it goes back to the bristles being feminine and that whole thing. But these flying ointments, I think, really, I think that there is a lot of validity there, because those plants, that's what these flying ointments were made from. So, you're talking plants like belladonna and monkshood, poison hemlock, mandrake. A lot of times, cannabis and hemp was used in these salves as well. And they would kind of trip out, and they would have these hallucinations, and it's said that they would use the flying ointments and the broom to fly to the devil's sabbath. So that's the whole legend behind them flying, and I think that it's just like definitely a metaphor for the plant medicines that they were working with.
and the plant medicines that you're working with that are right going to create inner journeys.
Exactly.
What is taking a psychedelic, what is that going to do to you? You're going to go on an inner journey. And so I think that that's kind of just always how I interpret these things. It's an inner journey. So witches were tapped in to self to be
So
able to
yeah.
go on these explorations and whatever, but within. But that's how you actually get to other places, and astral travel and everything else is by going within. That's how you tap into these things.
Yeah, and then a lot of these nightshades, some of them more than others, have a psychopomp energy to them when you're working with them, because it is all about traveling to the other worlds, the other realms, what have you. And as I said that, our cat started howling. I can hear him in the other room. He's probably
Yeah, I can
wondering,
hear him.
where is everybody? Why you're talking about witches and brooms? I want to talk with you. But yeah, no, totally. This is such an interesting weave, and ever since being a child, I was always intrigued by the image of a witch, and what it represents, and making all these connections, just it just brings everything kind of full circle a little bit.
Right.
All right. And Saturn. So, this section here, we're just going to talk a little bit about Saturnian medicine, kind of briefly touch on it because actually, tomorrow on Vibrant, I'm going to be on with Kyle of Tippy Canoe Herbs, and Gabe will be there, and Chance will be there. And we're going to talk about Capricorn herbs specifically for the season. So, I'm not going to spill all my beans on that one because I want to save some for tomorrow. But what I do want to talk about is just basically the strong boundary medicine that Saturn holds and has to share. Because as we talked about already, Saturn is all about boundaries. It's about protection. It's about foundation. It's about encapsulating. And so a lot of the Saturnian, Capricornian medicines and plants have those properties, whether it be physical properties or, doctrine of signature stuff, spiritual, emotional. They usually typically provide lots of protection on many levels. So right here is a slide of some nightshade plants. So I love this section of the plant world. God, I love it so much because there's so much mystery here. And I think that there are a lot of really great lessons that can be learned from the nightshades. And so from top left, we have that's tomato. Tomato's a nightshade. A lot of people know that. And then in the center top, we have monkshood. Now, monkshood is a plant of fascination for both Mario and I. The first time we both came across it was when we were in Ireland, actually. And we were staying at our friend's parents' house, and they had a beautiful garden, and she was growing monkshood, and we had never seen it before. And Mario can talk about this, but he was so intrigued by this plant, and so it has a soft spot in my heart because of that, because he was just like entranced by it. And it's one of those plants that when you look at it, it really does look like a monk wearing a hood. And so it kind of draws you in a little bit. And that's one of the things about the poison plants too that I find specifically with the nightshades. They're very intriguing looking. They beckon you almost. They want you to come close and like look at them. But if you come too close or you use too much of them, it can literally kill you. So they're plants that demand respect. And I think that is a really strong property of them, and that's part of their beautiful medicine. Is that maybe you don't respect yourself very much. Maybe you're trying to respect others more. Maybe you're trying to just find um, that level of respect that you want for yourself so that you can give to others. The nightshades and the poison plants are really great allies to work with on that level. And then right here on the top right, we have opium poppy, another one. It just like kind of brings you in. We talked about this on when Mario did his presentation on the Sacred Center. We showed this plant in the Doctrine of Signatures because just look at it. I mean, it's like X marks the spot. It's bringing you right into that center point. It's kind of showing you that it's a medicine for like frayed emotions, frayed nerves, just kind of feeling frayed. Maybe you are just kind of like wiling out or something. You need to come down. Poppy, is really great for that. And then so on the left corner bottom, we have Datura. This is one of the Datura plants that we grew. So just another one that's very intriguing, opens up at night in the moon. Very much psychopomp energy in this one. Then the bottom center, we have eggplant, which is another nightshade. Along with peppers and tomatoes, they fall into, or sorry, peppers and potatoes fall into that category. And then on the bottom right there, we have tobacco, which is another just really beautiful plant. Has this energy, like almost like a sucking energy, I find. And a lot of times tobacco can be used in pulling salves because it has the ability to pull toxins. And it can actually pull you in and out of realms, in my opinion. There's some sort of energy there. Typically, too, the nightshades have 5 petals. They're mind altering. they bring on delirium, they bring on hallucinations. All of these things that we were just talking about with the witches and the flying ointments.
Right, right. And did you already say Nightshade and just kind of breaking down that night and shade together?
No, but go for it.
I mean, just thinking about it, right? Night, shade, night, there that's when it's dark and there's no sun and everything else. And so and then shade also implies kind of a darkness sort of thing, a shadow or what have you. So just the fact that it's called night shade in general, I think is really interesting.
Yeah, totally. Definitely. So, anyway, I just wanted to kind of showcase this because I knew we were going to talk about the flying ointments. But these to me are crone plants. These are wisdom plants. They hold a lot of wisdom. They can bring you to places that will show you and bring you lots of lessons, life lessons, that can help you along your path. So, all hail poison plants. Next up, we have elder, one of my very near and dear trees, bushes, herbs, plants, whatever you want to say. Huge protection medicine going on in here, not only on the physical level in terms of, boosting the immune system or supporting the immune system, but what elder does is it literally, the elderberry itself, like the medicine in there, literally helps to create boundaries around your cells, like straight up. So that's one of the reasons why it's used to help kind of like stimulate the detoxification process of the body, to protect you. A lot of people use it as a preventative to hopefully not, have some sort of cold or flu symptoms going on. And that is one of its main, uses, usually the berries themselves. But elder, it just has such a huge protective energy to it. And just on a personal note, we have an elder bush that grows in our yard. And I had a really strong connection with it last winter, right? And in the spring, there were deer that were coming and they were eating the blossoms. And I was just like sitting there watching the deers eat the blossoms. I'm like, oh man, like I don't want them to eat all our blossoms because then we won't have berries, right? And I just got this really loud voice in my head that said, I protect you, you protect me. And right away, I knew I had to build a fence around the elder. And so I did. I built like it wasn't like the best fence, but it was a fence enough to keep the deers away at least. And then after I built that fence, the deers didn't eat any more of the blossoms. And so I feel like the elder was kind of reminding me, like, hey, I've given you protection. I provide you with this medicine so you can make medicine to help others get this protection. So I'm needing a little bit of protection from you. And so that was one of my little things about elder, just always asking for protection, but providing it as well.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's a lesson in boundaries, which I
Mhm.
think most Saturnian lessons come down to boundaries. Oftentimes, because I do tarot readings for people, a lot of times the things that we tend to talk about are very Saturnian. It's like your relationship with this person. Maybe you're too close to them. What's your relationship with self? What's your relationship with your habits and, with food and things like that? And a lot of it has to do with boundaries. Do you have healthy boundaries between all of these different types of things? So maybe there's certain things that your boundaries need to get a little closer and a little tighter. And there's other things where maybe they need to kind of go away, or maybe you need to distance yourself from X, Y, or Z. And so when you look at most lessons in life, it has to do probably with boundaries and expectations, I would say. And so if you put your hand in the fire, that's a boundary issue. That's a Saturnian lesson. I think most lessons basically boil down to something like that, which is why I tend to say that Saturn, the Saturnian principle, the Saturnian lessons that we receive are kind of the harsh ones, because you probably, maybe got too close to something or too far away from something or what have you. So I love that story that you got that hit to build the fence.
Yeah, definitely. And that's true. Boundaries, I mean, we talk about this a lot, but they are seriously so important and in every single way, and having healthy boundaries, it's like healthy boundaries, healthy life. I mean, honestly, the older I get, the more things that go on, the more people I interact with and meet. I mean, you have to have protection around yourself, and if you don't, you leave yourself open to all sorts of weird things happening, you know.
Yeah,
And then you're leaking energy, or you're giving too much energy. Then you're not receiving energy because you don't have boundaries. So everything's just open and blah 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 blah. You know, that goes along with self respect too. You know, when you are respecting yourself and you respect your time and you respect others, you realize how important boundaries are. And then when you do that for yourself, then you can also acknowledge and appreciate when others do that as well. You know, so
right.
just like we were saying in the beginning, when you start to work on your stuff and heal your things and do your, do good, that radiates out into the world, and then you're helping others do the same.
That's right. One of the most magical words in the English language is no.
Mm.
So it's just like it'll, it can change everything, basically, whether you agree to do something or not. So don't be afraid to say no if you're not feeling it.
It's so true, and, gosh, I mean, I know as a couple even we've had conversations on this of, the guilt that comes along with these things and all this stuff, and you as a younger person feeling like you have to do things, or we're not taught these things in school, and a lot of times our parents don't know these kinds of things either, so they don't really pass it down. So sometimes a lot of us, I know ourselves included, have had to learn it on our own. You learn the quote unquote hard way, but sometimes that's the best way. And not to get like too into it, but Mario and I had a really wonderful lesson in boundaries this year and where we live. We don't have to get into all the details of it, but we had to step up and have firmer boundaries with what our living situation is, because where we live we share garden space, right? And we were butting up against um basically our life views and our ethical views and the way we live, and the sense of integrity that we have about ourselves was not being met with the people that we share the garden space with. So we had to kind of be the bigger people and be like, you know what, we just need to cut this off. We There's so much space here that we don't need to share it. We can have boundaries. We can have a healthy boundary. We can still see each other, we can still share things, we can still do this, but we don't want, the intertwining was actually causing way more turmoil than it was worth. So it felt so freaking good to kind of like just stand in our boundary and stand in our truth and be like, yeah, we're going to do this. And you know what? Things have improved a lot since doing that. And it's just a reminder of just how important it is to have the boundaries, and to know that there's also medicines around that can help you to kind of establish these boundaries, because sometimes it's hard to do that. And these medicines like elder, they remind us of that, right? Taking it as an essence, it can be beautiful for helping you to do that.
Right. And the more you do the personal inner work, the more you kind of unveil what your true north is. And the more you do this inner journeying, the more you realize what your boundaries are,
Mhm.
And so it's just one of these things where where the line is for you. And so that's another thing where, just like what you were saying earlier, it's like it's just so easy for your boundaries to kind of get blurred because you're not essentially thinking about it. So I encourage anyone just to review, your boundaries again with all the different things in your life. And I would say right now too, what I'm going through is I'm reviewing my habits, my daily habits of what's habitual, what's necessary, what's needed. Am I just doing this out of, just kind of because of it's my pattern that I've developed over the years? Am I doing these things for the right reasons, for the wrong reasons? Because too, some of the things that you might be comfortable with right now, that may not be the case in a few months, and the things you would never think about doing right now it might be something that you might have to do down the road in several months time or whatever. And so I think Saturn is just kind of like present with all of this stuff essentially.
Yep. Couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree
And
more.
this is why too Saturn under the classical system it's the furthest planet out. So it represents that boundary. It represents the end of the line, and so that's part of the symbolism that it comes with.
Yeah, agreed. And I'm just so happy that you're doing that too, like reviewing what the habits are. It's really healthy to do it. We can't because you get when you get stuck in a habit, also you kind of almost get stuck in a rut a little bit because then everything is the same. And then you have to start to question like, why do I do this? So it's a good thing. And I think everybody benefits from it when you do it.
Definitely.
All right. So here back to the kind of more psychopomp energy of some of the plants we're talking about. This is a elder stem. And so the elder has hollow stems. Now inside you can see that there's like a hole inside of the white area of this stem, but that white part, it's just the pith. So it's a pith that can be actually hollowed out. It's really soft. And so you can hollow that out and they make billows for fires and flutes from it. There's folklore that Pan's pipes were actually made from elder. So this represents the fact that this is a journeying herb or tree. It can help you see into the other realms. It can help you communicate with your ancestors. You're wanting to kind of like it's like a gateway almost. It's a tunnel. It's asking you to enter, go inward, introspection. And so that's one of the reasons why this medicine is so good for establishing boundaries and all that stuff, because what tends to happen is when you start to go inward and ask yourself questions and really analyze yourself and why you do things and why you are the way you are, that's when a lot of the reasons for boundaries come up, right? Because you start to, like you're saying, Mario, it's like you start to analyze why you do the things you do. Well, maybe you need to have a stronger boundary around a certain habit that you have. Maybe you have to have a little more self-control. That's boundaries. And so anyway, elder just has a really great way of kind of communicating this, I think. But the biggest thing is just like, yeah, the communication with the other side and the ability to meditate and go within. This medicine really is wonderful for that. The other thing it's really great for, though, is trauma and grief. So somebody who's really going through something hard, maybe you're mourning the life of somebody that you loved or whatever it might be that ended in your life, elder can kind of come in and give you that protection that you might need during that time. And then it can also offer you an opportunity to maybe work with the ancestor or work with the person that's passed over through using elder, and on a symbolic level using a hollow stem of an elder. I mean, you really open up a lot of possibilities, in my opinion. So
Yeah, and a lot of symbolism too.
mm,
So one
mhm.
of the things I always say, right, is it all boils down to poles and holes. But the pole is also a hole. And so it's like one and the same sort of thing. So it's not like these sometimes are two separate things, but they're actually unified. And so when you look at a hollow stem like this, that's what it reminds me of. It's just like the pole is the hole as well, which I think is really interesting, which to me it just kind of boils down to even the center of the torus field, basically, the hyperbola section. And so, yeah, this is really interesting. I'm wondering because with hagstones, so hagstones are little natural stones that have a hole in it. It wasn't drilled. It just, became that way over time or whatever. And so we used to go look for hagstones, and they say that if you have a hagstone and you look through the hole, you can pierce the veil and see into other realms. I'm wondering if people did something similar to elder branches, once they took the pith out, if it was kind of like a little looking scope as well to see other things. I'm not sure, but
I
that
mean,
wouldn't
I
not surprise me at all.
It wouldn't surprise me either at all. And I kind of think that the spiritual medicine, like the communication with the other side or whatever, kind of implies that. But I bet they did, because when you get a big nice chunk of like the base of an elder tree there and you hollow that out, I mean that makes a pretty big hole. So
Hmm.
yeah, you can definitely do a lot of work on that level, for sure.
Nice.
And then lastly here, just more doctrine of signatures. And again, I'm gonna glaze over this stuff because yeah, I encourage you guys to tune into Vibrant tomorrow because we're gonna get down with some elder. I know Kyle's got a lot of wisdom with elder too. So, but one little tidbit, just bringing it back to Saturn. I mean, the growth of the tree itself actually mimics the glyph of Saturn. And so you see that here with the berries, how they slump over. And then when you kind of compare that to the slumping over of the bottom half of the Saturnian glyph, it's kind of, I mean, it's very obvious to me. And actually, the berries aren't the only thing that do that. The growth of the elderberry bush actually kind of curves downward just in that same direction. So it tends to, the older growth kind of slumps down further to the earth while the new growth grows behind it. It's really fascinating to watch. But I actually first learned this a connection from an herbalist named Saja Papam, who runs the School of Evolutionary Herbalism. He was the first one to bring this to my attention, and it was years ago. And when he said that, I had never heard anyone say it before, but it's just like now I can't not see it because it's just so clear to me.
Exactly. And so this drawing towards Earth is very Saturnian. And so if you'll notice, we don't have it here, but if anyone ever looks at the Rider Waite Devil card, there are so many instances where the artist, Pamela Coleman Smith, and Arthur Waite, they designed it this way for a very good reason. But there are so many instances of your eye being drawn towards the ground, towards Earth itself. And so even if you look at the alchemical symbol for Earth using the triangular system, it's a downward pointing triangle with a line through it. And so everything about Saturn, everything about well, it's funny. As I was saying earlier, there's always this kind of like aspect where the highest highs contain the lowest lows, and vice versa. So there's a lot of symbolism though related to Capricorn and Saturn that draws things downward. Um, I was thinking of the goat that climbs upward, right? But the goat is also known for having these very like low vibe sort of characteristics. They're tricksters and they'll get into everything and they just can make a mess of things and whatever. God bless them, right? But these bunches coming down towards the earth, it just reminds me almost of just the heaviness of Earth and just everything being drawn downward towards it. And so it does remind me of the Saturnian glyph that you have here. Obviously, the stroke on the right hand side coming down, but it also reminds me of the scythe, which is a classic symbol of Saturn.
Yes.
And so it reminds me of this the scythe's blade, just kind of like arcing downward and everything else. So yeah, the doctrine of signatures once again, it just corresponds with things that you would never ever expect. But once you start analyzing it, some of these patterns just really come to life in amazing ways. So when you first pointed this out to me, I was pretty blown away. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, it's really awesome, and that's such a good point with the kind of coming down to the earth. Yeah, I mean that's exactly what happens with it, and I know that you've been able to observe it too, just because there's a lot of elder where we live. Not only near our property, but just like even up and down the highway that that our main in and out from where we live. It's just kind of like lined with elderberry. Actually, it loves this region. Yeah. So that's our elder. But now, last but not least, I just wanted to talk a bit about comfrey. I'm not going to be talking about comfrey tomorrow. So I wanted to go into it though, because this is definitely Saturnian Capricorn plant. This is a plant of protection, and if you look at the image on the left, it has the spiral of life. And I know that I actually did talk about comfrey. I think it was during the Scorpio herbs on Vibrant that we did, and not because it's related to Scorpio, but because it's related to kind of like it's a healer, so it heals soft tissues of the body, and the skin specifically. One of the folk names of this plant is knit bone because it is famously known to be able to heal and regenerate bones and tissue really, really quickly and really well. And so when you have comfrey and you say make a tea of it or make an herbal infusion of it, it's like it's a thick liquid that's formed because it has like mucilage in it. That comes out once it's heated, and you can use this as, and even when it's not heated, actually, because you can use it as like a wound healer or a way to protect a wound that you maybe get when you're out in the wild. You can make a spit poultice with this. So you would just like take the leaf and chew it down and then put it right onto that wound. And it kind of almost creates like a second skin, in my opinion.
Mm.
And it's just really great, and it kind of, it has like a goddess energy to me. There's like a crone wisdom energy. It grows so prolifically, and it like will take over a space if you don't maintain it. And I just think it's like a healer of the world almost. It's the world card in the herbal tarot deck that I have, and I think that that's like very
Ooh.
appropriate. Yeah, it's very appropriate, and it's really famously known also for healing teeth, and being able to repair teeth. We have a good friend who actually healed an abscess tooth with comfrey, literally just chewing up the fresh leaf and sticking it next to the tooth that he was experiencing the abscess in. And he said within like 3 or 4 days, the pain was gone. And he didn't have any problems after that. And so, and I too have used it when I've even had just like a toothache. I've gone out and gotten a leaf, chewed it up, and put it next to the tooth that is painful. And by the second or third day, nothing, I wasn't having issues anymore. So it's a really great one. I kind of just want to look at my notes really quick to make sure. Yeah, the purple flower, that's another indication of Saturn, because it can kind of indicate that it has the ability to heal putrefied things, so like rotting flesh or things that are like deadening. Um can kind of indicate, the purple color can indicate that. And it has those nice hairs, almost like it looks very silky, but the hairs that are actually on the leaves are actually kind of rough. It's an interesting plant because it has a soft look to it, but when you go up to it, it actually kind of has like a rough exterior, which I think kind of like is kind of Saturnian, as well. And then the underside of the leaf, as you can see on the right side, it almost has like these like very prominent, like,
They're like little
uh
walls or
yeah, there
something,
you go. Thank you. It's like
or little
sectioned off.
dividers or something.
Yes. And that to me too kind of indicates its connection to Saturn. But yeah, it's a beautiful plant, and we grow it here, and I love it so much. And it's one of the plants that I first started using when I began my herbal journey, and I love watching it grow and seeing its patterns, and sitting with it too. I've gotten like some really great messages from comfrey. And yeah, another thing you can do, I know a lot of people like oil pulling. You can infuse coconut oil with comfrey and then use that coconut oil to do your oil pulling. So you're going to be getting the benefits of whatever oil pulling is doing. I'm not saying it doesn't help, but I know it's like up for, people are always questioning what is it really working or not, but there's a lot of people that get a lot of benefits from it. But if you add the comfrey to that, you're actually going to be just like strengthening all the tissue in your mouth. Because I know I've talked about this before, but this plant contains allantin, which is only produced by the allotonous gland of a mother's umbilical cord. So again, we're
Hmm.
going back to the life-giving properties of comfrey. And then I love just how the flower spirals. It's like the spiral of life. So there's kind of like a death and rebirth thing going on with this plant for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a few notes as you were talking.
Yeah.
It's really interesting that it corresponds with the world card, which is also known as the universe card in certain decks, because that card corresponds with Saturn. And so that's like a classic
Hmm.
correspondence. So to me, that's really interesting. The Saturnian thing still coming through. And then also, I'm not sure if you mentioned something about the skeletal correspondence with Saturn as well, but that's obviously a thing with Capricorn and Saturn in general, just kind of like being related to our bones, the
Yes.
structure of things, right? And then the teeth, the knit bone aspect of it. I thought that was interesting as well. And then also regarding the spiral, it's really fascinating because a lot of Capricorn symbols especially even if they go there's a lot of variety there. I made a video last year about the various types of symbols for Capricorn, and I would say of all of the signs, Capricorn has the most variation with the actual symbol itself, the actual glyph for Capricorn, but it always has this looping aspect to it on the right hand side. And then also, when you look at traditional drawings of Capricorn, of the sea goat, the tail always loops over itself. And then also, there are other versions of Capricorn that aren't necessarily a half goat, half fish or whatever. But sometimes it's actually a goat within a seashell. But the seashell always has this spiral effect to it, like a lot of seashells do. So there is a spiral of life aspect to Capricorn and Saturn. So I'm really glad you brought that up, and it's on full display here. In this photo on the left, that is beautiful. Yeah, I really like comfrey the way it looks, and so once again, Mother Nature is the best designer of all time.
Yes, I totally agree. And yeah, those are all really great points. And I think too, like even just looking at when I look at the underside of the leaf, for some reason I do get like skeleton vibes for some reason. And maybe that's just because it's so pronounced or something like that. But yeah, it's
No,
a
I can see that.
very yeah, and it's a really hardy plant. So when it does when it's growing, it's so hardy and just strong, that kinda, like, goes along with, the Saturnian thing as well.
For sure.
And I think, yeah, I think I got all of my herbal stuff out. So, I mean, with that said, in conclusion, I find it so beautiful how Saturn and kitchen witchery and magic and nature and working with the seasons and all of the things we talked about, the sacred center kind of all just intertwined so well with Saturn. I
Mhm.
find it to be such a beautiful thing. And, one of the other things that's just coming to mind right now is that, Saturn, at least here in the northern hemisphere, that falls in the winter. So it's during a time where we're usually, inside more. We've harvested our bounty from the fall and the summer, and hopefully we're able to, prepare food that we could can or dehydrate or freeze or save for ourselves for the winter, for the time when you do go within. And so that too just connects more with that kitchen witchery sort of homemaking, homesteading sort of stuff going on. And I know you have some really great points about this drawing. So I'd love to hear. I just want you to kind of expand on it as well, because I know both of us have a pretty soft spot for this one.
Yes, indeed. So this is probably one of my favorite drawings of Father Time or Saturn. And it comes from a Freemasonic tradition. And this is largely called the Weeping Virgin. And so there's lots of variations on this illustration. This one just happens to be my favorite. And I brought it up multiple times during Leo and Virgo season, and then also during my Decoding Chaos presentation on Interverse. And so what you're seeing here is you're seeing Father Time, and he is untangling the hair of the Virgin. And so symbolically, this woman, in my opinion, all goddesses kind of boil down to the same goddess, as far as I'm concerned. They're all just different aspects of it. So this Virgin is the Queen of Heaven. She's Isis. She's all of these different things. She's this motherly figure. And as I was saying earlier, this whole entire idea of the feminine being chaotic in a beautiful, brilliant way. Another way of saying this might be perhaps being primordial or being the essence of everything, the darkness which everything comes from, everything seemingly grows, in the dark, within the womb, within the soil of earth, underneath the surface. You don't see a seed germinating. It's underneath a layer of soil, of dirt and everything. And so, but here you're seeing that her tangled hair, being symbolic of this chaos, is being untangled by a masculine figure. And look at how like entranced he is. Like
Mhm.
he is staring deep into that, right? And she is not looking at him at all. She's almost like not even concerned with his presence. And isn't this kind of a dynamic? Isn't this kind of interesting how men and women, in the world, not all the time, obviously, but kind of operate? The idea is a woman generally wants to be chased, and a man is used to doing the chasing. And so, if you notice masculine and feminine symbolism, the feminine generally is passive, and she can kind of be symbolically. I always look at it as the woman can be throned. Uh, and I look at it like a beehive almost. The queen is throned in the beehive, and she does her thing, and then all of the other bees, they go out and get the pollen, and they go out and they come back. So generally, and this is traditional symbolism, so I understand that once again there's exceptions to everything, right? But generally, the man is the one who goes out and brings home the bacon, and then the woman is going to prepare it, right? And so that's how a lot of things work. But right here, what you're seeing in this illustration, you're seeing the masculine energy untangling the chaos and bringing order to a situation. And the broken pillar itself is symbolic of the chaos as well. If it were a complete pillar or a complete column, it would be more symbolic of order. And that's what columns and pillars and standing stones and towers and all of these different things, that's what they represent. It represents order, because the Axis Mundi brought order to the universe. It gave everything something to revolve around. It brought stability to the whole entire situation. And so I just think this is a beautiful play showing very, very deep symbolism that we can decode on multiple levels, because there's a lot going on here. But those are the main things that I kind of wanted to say. It also is the play between, obviously, not only on a sort of gender level, masculine, feminine, but also on an age level. So this figure, Father Time, he's older and she's younger. It's fascinating to me that the Hermit card, because once again, this illustration is called the Weeping Virgin. And so the card that corresponds with Virgo, the Virgin, the Queen of Heaven in the zodiac, is the Hermit card. And what do you have in the Hermit card? You have an old man generally who has a beard, and so, but it's ruled by Virgo. So there's this interesting dynamic or contrast that they're playing here that is very similar to the Hermit card. The old man that has gone within, which going within is more passive. It's I would argue that it could be interpreted as being more feminine. And so that is what he's looking for. He's looking for his other half. He's looking for his counterpart. You could say either, and they're showing it externally, but this is also an inner thing, so he's looking for the counterpart within. He's looking for his inner half within, and it's woman. And then she also too, I think essentially, basically, when it comes down to it, the more you look into masculine symbolism, you're going to find the feminine. The more you look into feminine symbolism, you're going to find the masculine. And so there's just always this thing that kind of goes on with that. And so I'm kind of rambling, but I think that those were pretty much my main points. So did you have anything else to say? And can you hear our cat going nuts out there?
I can hear him. I wonder if everybody else can hear him.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's right outside my door. I can tell he's howling. Anyway.
Right.
No, I think it's a beautiful ramble. I don't think you're rambling. I think it's more
Awesome.
of just, yeah, no, gosh, I mean, I feel like this illustration deserves maybe not a whole 2-hour episode worth, but I think it really does deserve all the ramblings that it brings up, because there is so much going on here. I love it. It's just yeah, it's fascinating. So
yeah, and I'll just say too, another aspect of this which I think is really interesting is that when you look at some versions of the strength card generally is an illustration of a woman taming a lion. This woman is very much symbolic of Virgo, and the lion is symbolic of Leo. The card is ruled by Leo, but it to me it shows the relationship between Leo and Virgo, this masculine solar energy and this feminine energy with Virgo. And a lot of older versions of the card, and we have some in our collection, she is with a broken pillar. And so I just think that that's a really interesting sort of thing. So there is a history of showing Virgo, the Virgin, with a broken pillar. In very much the same way, I'm reminded of yin and yang. And so if you study the I Ching, you're going to see hexagrams. They're made up of 6 different lines, but there's only 2 basic lines in the I Ching. It's the complete line, the complete horizontal line, that is yang, and the broken line, which is yin, which is feminine. So this pillar basically is very much symbolic of that yin energy. It's more passive, and as I've been saying, chaotic, but in all of the best ways. So once again, it's not derogatory or anything of the sort. It's actually very much the opposite, because that's where everything comes from. And so
Exactly.
I don't look at it as demeaning in any sort. So yeah, I think that's pretty much what I got on
Yeah.
it.
Cool. That's awesome. I love it. Yeah. I think that this is not going to be the last time that we talk about this illustration. So, well, with all of this said, this concludes our slideshow, at least, and just want to thank you all for being here. And babe, thanks for coming on. I think this was great. I'm so glad that you were down to hash all this out with me, because I know we both just have a lot to say on these subjects. And yeah, together, I feel like we served up some really great stuff tonight. So thank you so much.
Yeah, you got it. This was fun. All right, I'll
And
see you in a few minutes when you're done with your show. But what were you gonna say?
yeah, I was just gonna say, do you want to tell anybody anything, or I mean, all your links and stuff are down below and all that stuff. But if you have anything you wanted to say, go for it.
Sure. There's familiar faces watching right now. So just wanted to say that I am working on a video that I'm very much excited about. And it has to do with Northern symbolism, which shouldn't be a surprise to anyone who follows my work. But it's going to be a really good one. It's the longest script I've ever developed. And it's kind of my most concise effort to put forward a lot of the main ideas that I associate with that. So that'll be coming, I'm guessing, sometime next week. So just keep an eye out for that. But otherwise, yeah, this was really fun. Thanks for having me, and have a good rest of your show. Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Bubba.
All right.
All
Love you
right.
lots. See ya.
Love you too. All right,
All right.
bye.
Bye.
Oop. All righty, everybody. Well, thank you for hanging out. Yeah, all right. So that was great. I've been wanting to talk about this subject for a while. I love talking about it. A lot of people who know me know that this is my area of just love and comfort. And if I ever get to meet any of you guys in person or have you over, I will shower you with all the homey love that I have, and hospitality and food and drink and merriment. So it's just one of the things that I just, like I said earlier in the talk, um, I have such a deep resonance with this type of stuff, just because of what was instilled in me from a young age with my family, and the way that they did all of these things as well. And they passed that down, even if they didn't know they were passing it down. They did, and I appreciate it with them all the time still. And I'm fortunate to still have, both of my grandmas in my life, and my parents as well. And so those traditions carry on. And when I do get to go home, it's always there. And I love to do it. So I love hosting. I love sharing with people. I love making food. I love making people feel comfortable. And that's one of the points of the show as well, is to kind of just be able to try and do that virtually somehow. So with all that said, as usual, I've got just a couple of updates for you guys. Let me find my slides for here. So next week, I am very happy to have Andrea Crone, the Cozy Crone. She will be my guest next week. And we're going to talk about, she had a really great conversation with Davin on his show, Chironversations, where she opened up a lot about her mediumship and what that means to her, and how she's developed it, how she nurtures it, how she then was able to discover more about her ancestry, and finding out why she has some of these callings and abilities. And so I loved their conversation, and I want to continue it on our show next week. We're also going to talk about her as an artist and all of that lovely stuff that she does and all the art she creates. So that'll be next week, January 17th at 4 p.m. So tune in for that one. And I am just really looking forward to chatting with Andrea on the show. Now, full moon offering for this month that just came out on the 6th. A lot of you have probably already seen it, but it is my soap and shampoo bars, and I do have a handful of them left. I'm saving a few for certain select people, but I've got a couple left. So if you are interested, just reach out and we can go from there and talk about that. Super, super just happy with how these soaps coming out. Again, another element of kitchen witchery. You're making like the toiletries and all the personal care products that you're using. Typically, you're making them from scratch, and that's basically one of my strong suits. What I love to do, and that's one of the reasons for this project as well. So I've got soap and shampoo. And again, up on the screen is my menu. A lot of it is basically the same as it has been. Right now, I am just really, really stoked on the soap. So I'll just go through the soaps quickly. Comfrey, nettle, and pine shampoo bar. I talked about this already, but the pine that's in that shampoo bar is from a very special friend of mine, Pedro, who it was last summer or the summer before. He like collected pine resin from all the special places he went to, and he boiled it all down, and he separated all the pine needles and everything from it, and he refined it, and he gave it to me. And so these pine bars are really special because there's just a lot of really great magic in there, and the pine resin oil that I ended up making from it is just, it's world class. So it's really nice. Then the oat and honey bars. There's ground up oats in there for exfoliation. Oats are really nurturing to the skin. Really great for inflammation, and if you're having like acne and things like that, it can be really helpful. And there's raw honey in there as well, which is just a really great natural moisturizer, protectant of the skin. Can also have some great healing effects if you're dealing with any kind of skin ailment, really. And then calendula salt soap. Definitely a favorite. I love salt in general, and I love salt in soap because it's very protective. It's very cleansing to not only the physical body, but the spiritual auric energy that surrounds the body. It's very, very clarifying, and it has a lovely uplifting scent to it because just calendula gives me that golden, sunshiny feeling, and there's calendula petals in there. And so there's just a lot of love that has gone into the soap. And I used to work at a soap shop, actually. So I worked for an artisan soap maker for about 2 years, and she taught me so many great things, not only about running a small business, but how to make just beautiful soap. And I feel like I've taken her teachings and kind of like infused them into my soap making practice. And so there's just a lot of love that goes into everything I make, but that soap just, I really love it. I love the whole process of it. It's very satisfying. And if you haven't signed up for the newsletter, you can go to my website and read the latest newsletter, and I share a recipe for soap, and I go through some of the steps that you can take, because a lot of people are a little bit scared to make soap with lye. So I make cold process soap. So you're using lye, which is caustic. It is very dangerous, but it's nothing to be afraid of. So a lot of people kind of lie, but it's all about just taking precautions, paying attention, and being organized, and you will be totally fine. And the lye is not scary. So anyway, with all that said, yeah, if anybody has questions or wants to contact me, wants to have a consultation, wants to get some products, you can email me, michelleshealinghome@gmail.com. Head to my website as well, or you can also text me 503-568-1569. And with that, y'all, I want to say thank you again for being here. Thanks to everybody in the chat. Thank you for all the love. I'm so excited that you guys had a good time and we're here and able to ask questions and just share this time with us. So, yeah, thank you. Love y'all. Enjoy the rest of your week. Tune in tomorrow to Vibrant with Chance and Slick. Me and Kyle of Tippy Canoe Herbs will be on. So that's going to be 6 p.m. Pacific Central Time on the Innerverse podcast. We are going to get in deep to the Capricorn herbs. So we're gonna, like I said, just glaze the surface today because I wanted to save a lot of nuggets for tomorrow. And so along with Kyle, we made a presentation for y'all, and we're gonna be going into all of that. So until next time, I love you all and take care. Have a good night.